1 year ago today, attacks were reported across a number of Ukrainian cities, including near the capital of Kyiv. Since the war began, tens of thousands of people have been killed, millions have been displaced, and cities have been turned to rubble. International monitors have even said that it is very difficult to put exact numbers on casualties and the economic fallout from the war. Regardless, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says this will be the year his country prevails. He plans to meet virtually with President Biden and other G7 leaders today. And earlier this morning, overnight, the Pentagon announced another $2 billion for ammunition, drones, long-term security assistance for Ukraine, following President Biden's unannounced visit to Kyiv, where he pledged America's continuing commitment. Meanwhile, one of Russia's closest allies, China, is calling for a ceasefire and peace talks. It's all part of a 12-point plan to end the war. And to talk more about this war, we are joined by George Beebe, the director of grand strategy at the Quincy Institute and a former CIA Russia analysis chief. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
So the war is a year old. What have we learned about both combatants in this one, Russia and Ukraine?
Well, we've learned that the Russians are not capable of conquering and governing the vast majority of Ukraine's territory. Their effort to seize the capital failed abysmally, and they've really struggled even to hold on to the territory that they had in the east of Ukraine. So the Russians are not going to win this war unconditionally. They're not going to resubjugate Ukraine. That's clear. We've also learned that Ukraine can perform extremely well on the battlefield with the assistance of the United States and NATO. I think that combination has proved quite potent. The real question right now is whether the Ukrainians can drive Russian military forces out of Ukrainian territory altogether. And I think there are real doubts about how successful that effort can be at this point.
So I understand after a year we have seen that Russia hasn't done it yet, but why do you feel like this means that they can't do it going forward, especially if China starts arming Russia?
Well, I think whether China starts arming Russia is going to be a big question here. I think we're not quite at that point yet. But the big problem that the Russians have is producing what military experts call combined arms operations, coordinating air power and ground attacks, missile attacks, intelligence in a way that can seize vast amounts of territory. They've struggled to do that. On paper, Russia should have air superiority over the Ukrainians, but they don't. And that means that they've really had to turn this war into a war of attrition, very artillery dominant. And I don't think there's much prospect that the Russians are going to gain air superiority at this point.
And how does it end? Are we going to be safer? Is the world going to be less safe? And when does it end?
Well, that's a big question about when it will end. Right now, this war looks to be grinding on for a long, long time to come, unless there is some sort of negotiated settlement. And none of the sides at this point appear ready for that. So are we going to be safer at the end of this? I think the answer is no, not unless we're able to turn this into a compromise settlement that the Russians buy into. Otherwise, I think we're going to wind up with a major source of instability in Europe for a long time to come. This war is going to grind on. Ukraine is going to be wrecked in the process, and it's going to radiate instability out into Europe and the rest of the world. So this is a very bad thing, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, it's tough not to agree with that. George Beebe, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.